Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, we're going to have that build showcase on Refactor that I've been putting off, although mostly because it kind of got a little bit bigger than I had ever intended it to, as I went with a bunch of Refactor builds in the end with the build collection, as we added 3 at the start of this season, and I've been playing around with all 3 of them, and even one of them has basically a second variant. So we'll be looking at 4 builds here today, so this will be likely a long one. But hopefully interesting in all ways. As always, we'll be using a bunch of the build pictures from the build collection. I will, of course, link to the build collection and to all of these pictures. We'll go through some numbers here as well, although not as in-depth. These aren't weapon builds per se, but we'll still kind of compare, for instance, Refactor to a high-end build. And also, one of the versions that I kind of have made is a red factor with red cores, basically, kind of like a red FI idea. And we'll be comparing it actually to a red FI in there as well, just to have a baseline comparison between those. Then as well, we'll take it into some gameplay and go through each of the styles of builds, and I will kind of, in that time as well, explain what I'm doing, how I'm playing them, and try to give you the tools if you want to make them to at least have a starting point. All of this will, of course, be timestamped down below, so feel free to jump around if you want to go to a specific thing. But let's go get started for now with going over the build. And we'll start by looking at the gear set, of course, as a refactor, and that is refactor, not refractor, as including me, I said that as well. At the start of the season, first time that I saw it, I said refractor a dozen times wrong, and I might even get one in still into this, but I think at this point I have it in me of saying a refactor. And the Refactor Gearset, as it came in, well, we have on the 2-piece, we have some status effect, and the 3-piece, we have skill damage, 25% of it, which is actually quite a bit in comparison to some of the other gear sets that we have around skill builds. And then, of course, on the 4-piece, what we get is actually the main course of this, and that is Return to Sender. And that is that receive 10% of the damage dealt by your skills. So this is receive repairs onto ourselves. And then your allies receive repairs of 20% of the damage dealt by your skills. So whatever we have in these slots, whatever they do to the enemy, we receive a portion of that ourselves, and our allies receive a larger portion of that. Now, with the chest as well, these numbers go up to 20% and 35%. We will be using the chest here and there. Actually, we will definitely cover a chest version of this, but it's kind of like with the striker. There are positions where the chest is actually kind of worthwhile, and especially when you can give up a little bit of damage and then gain it in healing a little bit if the healing is more important. But for general use, actually, the overall build that we'll discuss kind of as the mainstay for this gear set, if you're just making one, make this one, I would say. And that is with 2 pieces of Hana-Yu here. We have the force multiplier here for perfect combined arms with it, and then we have a Hana-Yu second piece here with kinetic momentum. And we're going a Hana-Yu because actually we gain 10 skill haste and 10 skill damage. Opportunity cost wise, there is nothing else we can really put here that competes well with it, at least when we want to go kinetic momentum. If you're going something else than the force multiplier, because of course this force multiplier, you do need to hit enemies, because this is whenever you hit an enemy for just 3 seconds, you gain a bonus, so you have to consistently be shooting towards them. If you go, for instance, with tech support, you could go actually with, as we'll see, for instance, as well with like explosive version, going with, for instance, China plus sacrifice. You can also go sacrifice plus, for instance, wyvern and then tech support. But that's more if you're choosing to go that route. I very much enjoy this setup for this. And that's because this does give a little bit more damage. And of course, our healing is based on the damage. Without the chest talent here, adding to our damage by quite a bit, while the chest in its values that it applies to our allies, this actually does already a part of it just by doing more damage. Here we're going with kinetic momentum. You could also, of course, go with either Overwatch or Glass. That's the 2 big replacements for this. And then on the backpack especially as well, we can go combined arms or tech support. It is going to be situational. It is going to be depending on what you kind of like. But as we'll go over the builds as well, as we'll go to the build pictures, because we'll also be discussing a status effect version and, of course, an red version, just because they are actually interesting. But yeah, Refactor, this healing as well, we have to know that this isn't affected by anything repair skill, anything incoming repair, anything outgoing repair. Any of those things are not applicable here. It is literally how much damage these two do, whatever you have in those slots, in this case a turret and drone, that and percentage of it comes back. So affecting the damage is the only way that you can affect how much your healing you do with it. And that then leads us into our skills, as that's of course kind of what we base all that damage around. Now here, the classics to go with is turret and drone, of course. Turret and drone are very consistent. I've tried it out with a bunch of different ways of setting it up, and actually we'll go into a few. One setup with mortars, one setup with trying to go status effect route. Both of those, just the consistency of the turret and drone really makes a difference, as these continuously are hitting the enemy. So whenever your allies, and this is also the thing with this build, I would definitely say that Refactor is a build that you kind of run in group. Now this can be like even small groups, 2-mans or such, but it's really in its place in a 4-man. And especially as well in a 4-man, as the healing is only to the subgroup, which is one of its limitations for raids and for countdown, because it only heals within your subgroup. Now, skill-wise then, yeah, so turret and drone really are the standout pieces here, and that's why also, like, in the general setup, I would go with these. Then we have, weapon-wise, we can go a few different routes here with this. For instance, you could go test subject instead of the capacitor here as well. I definitely enjoy the capacitor a lot more. You do have to shoot more constantly, so with in sync, with perfect in sync, as we have here, for instance, as a secondary. And here as well, why I'm taking the harmony over the test subject is especially just ammo, secondary type of ammo. Because if I were a test subject and a capacitor, when I run out of ammo, I run out of options. And we do still want to trigger alongside having, for instance, in this case, we want to keep shooting just to have a combined arms trigger and our turret and drone to kind of benefit from that. But especially the capacitor's bonus as well, together with having a little bit more crit chance, crit damage, makes it a lot more effective. And especially when we start comparing it, for instance, to high end, where we also include the weapon into it, this would be at a much more higher, like a bigger disadvantage. But again, as well, that depends on talent picks as well. If we're going tech support, something like InSync is a lot more, can be a lot more consistent, because you can actually just pop out, hit it for a second, and then kind of have it up for a few seconds longer. Then as well, specialization-wise, we're basically going to be sticking with Technician unless we have a really good reason to go something else. Now, in the case, for instance, of the Mortar one, we have a really good reason. We want the Mortar, so we go with Demolitionist. That also brings me actually to that Refactor is actually one of the gear sets that has a split cores. So everything on the left side here, so basically the mask, the chest, and the holster, they come with yellow cores. Everything on the right side of the build, basically the backpack, the gloves, and the knee pads actually come with blue cores. So here as well, even for the knee pads that are yellow cored here, I had to find one with skill damage, optimize that up, and then re-core the score, recalibrated, I was about to say reconfigured, but recalibrated to be a yellow core there, a red core here, and this is, of course, we have Technician to give us one core back. That is actually somewhat important, because that makes it so that, for instance, trying to find some of these pieces, it does need a little bit of optimization to be at its best. So that can be a little bit more costly and a little bit more prohibitive if you're kind of like just starting out. Overall, though, that Refactor, we want to, in general, just set up a build that can do skill damage. And that's kind of also the reason here why we are going with several versions of it. You can go with different skills that do different things in different ways, and some of them are actually pretty powerful in those ways that they have. But that doesn't mean that we're going several versions, because we have a turret drone version, we have basically a mortar version, and then a kind of a similar to an Eclipse version, and then a red version as well. Let's actually go start looking at their build pictures, as we'll go over several variants. And yeah, let's actually start looking at how these builds are laid out beyond the gear sets and such. And we'll do that, of course, by looking at their build pictures. I'll link to all of these below. We'll start off here with 3.04 in the build collection, the RF turret drone, Refactor turret drone. Then we'll go to the 2.06 with Refactor. really rolls off the tongue. Really good name. And this is then, yeah, the status effect kind of version, kind of going for an Eclipse kind of playstyle. Basically more of a foam Eclipse, but then we're, instead of foam, doing the fire, basically. And then as well, a Refactor, which does roll off the tongue. And yeah, this one then is kind of a turret drone hybridish setup, a turret draw kind of setup. But in this case, red, but we could actually also take it yellow. Same as well, actually. Let's start with this yellow one. Let's zoom in a little bit more as well with this 3.04. On here, we have basically the obvious setup of just going skill damage plus skill haste. As we talked about, repair skills and such does nothing. Incoming repair does nothing. Don't take those. If you see anybody making a build or running it with repair skills, just point that out to them. It does nothing. It is only dependent on how much damage your turret and your drone do. And we basically get, although it is kind of hard, one of the annoying things is we don't have, in the same way of, for instance, dealing damage, that we can exactly see how much healing we are doing, for instance, or such. But just guesstimation-wise, by looking at the bar, it does seem to be that it is 10% of, at least for the player themselves. If you just damage yourself and we kind of go like, okay, this is how much damage is going to get healed and how long that would take, that does actually align with what the turret, at least what I tried at, would do if it was healing us for 10%. It doesn't seem to be wildly off in some way. Then as well, so here we have then the yellow version as we saw it basically in that same way. What we could do, of course, as well is kind of go more of a glass setup. If you're going glass, sacrifice is definitely one to consider because you can go sacrifice wyvern. Although in my case, I have tried this out with glass as well. Nowadays, kinetic momentum has gotten a buff as well. So actually on the third drone end, it makes a lot more sense. But if you're going glass, yeah, you could either just put it on here, although a sacrifice actually does a little bit more, even though we are losing a little bit on the combined arms there as well. One other option that we have is kind of what I have in this corner is if we take a full yellow glove and we take a strategic alignment and a sacrifice, that leads us into the mortar. Now, I like running the mortar especially as well with the hive. That hive works really well for dealing damage kind of consistently, and also when you're, for instance, running missions and such, I find that can be put into places, especially if you know where they're going to spawn. Where the enemy spawns, usually they come out, they might do some damage to your allies, but then you heal that up back up, and then also you can RCCing them with that. And then the mortar, of course, is one of the bigger damage dealers that we have in like one hit. And yeah, that can heal up everybody way beyond what anybody really realistically will have running around in heroic, at least. Even a full tank is healed up by one hit pretty consistently by 20% of that number. That is the two main kind of setups that we'll kind of look at here for the yellow. And generally, yeah, I am going to go with kinetic momentum. Kinetic momentum, since it has a buff, since it has had a buff, taking it from 30% total skill damage to 45% total skill damage, that has actually made quite the difference for kinetic momentum versus glass. The thing is, though, that you have to remember is that our weapon as well, especially in kind of this setup, is going to do damage as well. The player themselves is another turret, basically, and we do damage, and this isn't affected by kinetic momentum. If we're taking glass, that does apply there. That's also why on a high end, when we compare it in a little bit, I'll be comparing it to a kinetic momentum setup and also a glass setup, because especially there where we can put a little more crit chance, crit damage on it, the weapon kind of comes alive and actually does a lot more than it does here. But overall, on the yellow end, yeah, we're taking just skill haste, skill damages. All the mods are going to be skill haste. One of the things you can go for here as well is maybe putting in a little bit of skill duration mods instead. It kind of depends on how you're fighting and such, especially because the turrets you can generally pick back up as well, and skill duration will just make them last a little bit longer. But I find that you will lose them more often than not. A turret, especially the drone, is pretty squishy, and the haste is kind of handy. It doesn't make too humongous a difference, though, because we're kind of taking it from around the 19 second if we just swap out all of the, around the 17 second for the drone if we swap it out to skill duration. But we don't also gain that much skill duration out of it, so it's kind of a moot point. Then if we take it onto this second one, we come to this status effect version. So one of the things that, of course, the gear set has, and we often just choose to not use it if we're going the turret drone route, we're not doing any status effects there. We're just kind of wasting that stat, but that's kind of fine because, yeah, the consistency of the turret drone is really good. But one of the things that I instantly wanted to try with this gear set was, oh, what if we try to maybe do some CC with it? Basically a fire eclipse, but then, you know, without the eclipse. Layout-wise, this would seem very familiar because this is basically the same layout as a foam eclipse, because, of course, we don't have the spread from Refactor, doesn't do anything for our spreads. It's basically just the damage that matters. So we are taking Creeping Death and BTSU Glove here, but the BTSU Glove is also really nice for the Hive because it does give the Hive here with just the skill, the Stinger Hive. It does actually, yeah, make that a much more viable tool, and then also we can overcharge with it and even supercharge with it for the whole group, giving everybody their hives back, or even giving, you know, if someone's running pulse, they have an overcharged pulse now, which adds 15% damage to everybody if they pulse. Big if. But yeah, if they do, yeah, a group-wide overcharge is a really powerful tool. And then, of course, as well, we gain ourselves a much larger radius for this. Our hive comes back really quickly, once per 2 minutes, which is actually not that big of a cooldown. And then here, just because we're basically taking the opportunity cost here, basically of going with the BTSU Glove, we are taking the chest. Now, with the turret drone kind of version that we saw a second ago, you could definitely go to chest there as well. I should actually add that to the build picture. The thing is, though, that I find myself, even in Legendary, finding the chest a little bit overkill. Unless you're really with a weak team that is really getting hit way too much, it is kind of overkill. Because even running it with a full red team around me, running it with 3 strikers, I found that most of the time, even without the chest, we're healing them up so fast that the chest is kind of wasted. Because all it does is increase our healing amounts. Here, though, we are kind of taking it just because we want to have these 2 slots filled in with these. Especially Perfect Creeping Death, of course, will spread the fire on initial. It is important to know 2 things about this build, because there is some synergies here that aren't actually working out in our favor. Anything that the Creeping Death spreads the fire to does not count as that initial fire. So when we set the enemies on fire with the initial hit and then their fire, all of that will heal our allies. Anything that Creeping Death creates, that does not count as initial skill damage for this. This is just a distinction that kind of the game uses, and especially in this build is very important. The second one that isn't directly clear is that actually the status effect, the Hive benefits a lot from skill damage. In this case, though, the Hive is such a good tool, and yeah, it's kind of behind me, but I'll say it's up there. Let's go with it up there. The Hive is such a good tool, and I like it so much that I'm willing to kind of take that hit, because actually the status effects will only apply to the bleed side of the Hive, which is a very minor part of it. But there as well, it's only the initial hit of it, and not per se anything that the Creeping Death spreads it to. Sometimes as well, you want to actually start your fire first, kind of in the same way as with a foam eclipse. You want to foam first, and then if you have, like, you know, a secondary tool, you do that then. But in this case as well, you want to do your fire first, so that eats the Creeping Death and then spreads it around. Even if it's not doing extra damage, you know, the CC of it is there, and then you send out your Stinger Hive. Here as well, we're pairing it with a capacitor, again for more damage, because yeah, the healing is dependent on the damage. We want to do a little bit more damage. So instead of what I generally have, for instance, on a foam eclipse of a Scorpio, or even on a fire eclipse, a Scorpio, we're going with this. Although a Scorpio, yeah, depending on your team, depending on how much CC is needed, yeah, you can go this route as well. What I have here as well is things to consider, which is, for instance, a Hermano or a setup, especially depending on what missions you're doing or what you're exactly doing. You might go with something else. So, for instance, some of you may be familiar with bounty cheesing, where we're kind of making everything spawn from a single door. This Creeping Death is kind of useless then, right? Because it's a single door. Everything's going to be in that fire camp. What if we give ourselves a little bit more haste and we give our team some reload? Or if we just, especially if we're, instead of the capacitor, running the Scorpio, and we give our team a perfect opportunistic upon the enemies. Both of those 2, of course, are really powerful. Here though, we could go actually with other skills. Although I feel both of these, the fire and the stinger, are both of, to me, the best tools that both deal skill damage and also status effect. And that's why I go with these two especially. There are some other choices you could make here, but especially you shouldn't consider the things that are just purely CC, because of course they're not dealing damage and they're not healing. You might as well be Eclipse if you want to run those. Yeah, let's go to the final one here as we go into a Refactor. Now, this is actually layout-wise very similar to any turret drone hybrid. If you're familiar with my style of turret drone hybrids, we generally have a memento, we generally have a sacrifice, and then the other four pieces. So, for instance, in the build collection, there's a negotiator, there's a striker that kind of are set up like this. And what we have done here is trying to extract a little bit more damage from the weapon end. And in this one, I would say that there's two main ways of going with it. We'll kind of see both ways when we take it into gameplay. But actually, hear me showing it just with yellow or with red cores. You could actually go the yellow cores that you would normally have with a turret drone hybrid, where you have the 5 yellow cores with Technician as a 6th, one from the Memento, and then, yeah, the 4 pieces basically yellow cord. That's also why you notice that even on all the pieces, I'm of course going with that core. And of course, if we're recording it to red, we're recording it already. So we can really easily go reds there. But here, actually, I've been running this for this season, and especially with the modifier of the season, I've been enjoying this quite a bit. Once we have the memento charged up, the memento, of course, feeding kind of into our weapon and also into our skills with the yellow end, and even giving us a little bit regen. Although, of course, the regen of this build is a little bit stronger, but especially if we kind of go with the modifier. And I think with next season's modifier, having played it in the PTS a little bit, this works out pretty good with the turret and drone as well here, because we are actually gaining some skill damage and such from the modifier together with some weapon damage. So we're kind of eating into 2 pies, basically. We're taking a bite from here and a bite from there, instead of, a red build that is just taking, although a much bigger bite just from the red. And while they are pretty weak, they still heal decently. And once the memento is charged up, which is these numbers as well, then we actually don't have that weak of a turret and a drone. But I feel as well, the yellowest version of this can work out. But what I've had here, a lot of success with here as well, is actually just running the mechanical animal. And together with modifiers, as again, this kind of a build that, yeah, kind of does need the boost of a modifier in some way, either this season's or next season's. But if we have that, we are actually at 2 yellow cores. We have from Technician, we have 1 from Memento. So we're at 2. We can't get 4 from a mechanical animal. From normal future perfect instead of future perfection. What we can get is just having 3 cores from normal, but actually with perfect, and that's also why we're going with mechanical animal, we can get 4, and we can go from 2 to 6 basically, and then overcharge. But we do have to do so with a much weaker weapon, because especially the capacitor here is actually the much better choice damage output-wise. We are, of course, gaining a little bit from those 2 yellow cores, but especially, for instance, for this season, when we overcharge, there's actually a quirk with the capacitor where when we go to that in effect 7 tiers for an overcharge, which normally we wouldn't consider that in that way for the skills, and yeah, it is definitely true for the skills. There's no like 7th tier for the skills. There is one for the capacitor, and especially that can kind of raise the capacitor's damage quite well. But overall, I've been enjoying this. This has kind of been in the same way of a red FI, where we have kind of the buff and then self damage, but very bad healing. This has a little bit better healing and then self damage and not the buff at all. So it does work out. It does, for instance, yeah, offset no regen a little bit. It can work as a combat medic in that way. Yeah, let's actually go look at some of the numbers behind these. And for that, we'll go to the spreadsheet. This will, of course, also be linked in the description down below, so you can go and look at it at your leisure or read along if you want to. This is 2-parters. We have basically comparing first the refactor, just the yellow that we had, kind of to a turret and drone build, especially because I feel a lot of people overestimate how much the turret and drone parts of the turret drone on the refactor actually are behind versus a high end, because they're barely. behind. And the other part is, yeah, the high end, what it gains is that it has the opportunity to get a little bit more damage out. But yeah, we're going to compare those. And of course, as well, we're going to take the Refactor that we saw a second ago and put it up against red FI, basically, so that we can compare those two with each other as well and kind of know what their damage outputs is, just also to have kind of a ley line of how these deal. Let's, of course, zoom in a little bit just so we have it a little bit bigger, although not humongous, but a little bit bigger. What we have here is basically the Refactor build, and each of the builds is broken up in this way, where we have the weapon first, and then the turret and the drone separately. And what I've done here for the turret and drone, so you may notice that for the weapon, we're just calculating here. For the turret and drone, I just took the easy way and just used them in-game and just took the number from in-game. And of course, the turret and the drone, they don't headshot, or well, even if they do headshots, because they can actually hit headshots and you'll see a red number, they don't do more damage on a headshot, they don't do crit, so they don't crit. So their average damage, what we normally would consider average damage that we have to kind of calculate out for, you know, weapon side of things, that's just that. Whatever they hit here, that's their average damage. So we're taking that in here, we're putting in the stats as if they were a weapon, basically. Now, of course, the thing is, though, that the turret and drone are much less consistent. So kind of looking at them like this, that's also why I generally don't include turret and drone in like these, because at the very least, on this weapon end, there are times that we're kind of outputting DPS at a DPS level. There might be a second somewhere where you're just shooting at, let's say, a named or a boss or raid boss, and you're outputting at full DPS, you're, you know, stacked at full and such, and then also you're shooting them for the full second. So you're outputting actually burst DPS in a realistic sense. The turret and drone just barely ever do that. They are much more finicky in what they're targeting. The drone might be just going off at a target at the distance, or just not wanting to actually follow your command to attack someone. The turret might be aiming at a wall just because there's a person on the other side of it while there is a whole army in front of you. So the damage from those is much less consistent, but we're still going to take the theoretical numbers here, and we're not going to kind of reduce them by percentage or something. I feel I wouldn't be able to give you numbers for those. So we're just kind of taking them at full face value. But yeah, we have those, and then we have it combined. So we're just taking all of the DPSs, adding them all up, and just getting a new DPS out of it. And then we're comparing them as well into themselves. So do you see that there's grading here to the colors, basically? And that means that all of the white ones are kind of comparing between themselves, all of the slightly grayer ones between themselves, and so on and so on. So we're just basically comparing all of the turrets against each other. We're comparing all of the drones against each other, and then the combines against each other. Then on this right side, we have it actually within a thing. So the weapon, and then the turret, and then the drone of this setup, because we want to know that as well, because from this we can kind of deduce how much damage is coming from the turret and the drone, and how much is coming from the weapon end of things. If we look at the Refactor, and especially if we kind of look at the turret, let's start there. We see that actually when we look at a kinetic momentum version of a high end, and actually to show what I mean with that, let's actually take it to a build picture of it for a second, which is just this. So this is the base build that we're kind of comparing it as to with the high ends, and this is just 2-piece Empress, 2-piece Hanyu, 1-piece Wyvern, here with glass cannon, although actually in that calculation there we have it first with kinetic momentum, then with glass. We have both versions, and especially what we get here then is the ability to add in a lot more reds. Now in the Refactor, we could add in 5 places basically where we could swap a skill haste, for instance, for crit chance, crit damages. You don't gain too much from it. It isn't still a perfect comparison to the end, yeah, kind of take a red-ish or crit chance, crit damage kind of setup, because we do gain a decent amount of crit chance and crit damage going this route because of the capacitor as well. But yeah, that's the other build, just to know what we're comparing it against. And let's take it back here. But yeah, that version is actually just barely ahead. It is insignificantly ahead on the turret and the drone, because actually that 25% that we gain from the gear set is pretty close to what we gain from the brand bonuses that we would get here. Now, that then is actually, yeah, the turret and the drone of this build basically do the same as the turret and the drone of a normal turret drone build. Now, of course, we gain then in the weapon end. Yeah, we go up by quite a bit, especially here with that crit chance and crit damage. especially when we go and look at the glass one. As we were talking about, the kinetic momentum is now a lot more actually than glass, but it's only applying to the turret and drone. We see that on the high-end glass here, the turret and drone are actually dropping by quite a bit if we're comparing, when they're comparing still to that refactor here. But that weapon basically doubled. And this is kind of the thing. I kind of like glass there. Glass does this, I can control much better than I can the turret and the drone. So it ends up becoming a thing of like your tool being a lot stronger can actually be very effective. And that difference is really felt, especially in the high-end version. But here in the refactor, yeah, a lot of our damage, because if you compare how much the turret is higher than our weapon, it's 42% ahead of it, where, for instance, in the high-end version with kinetic momentum, it is 14% ahead of it. So the weapon is much higher. Because of that, the turret is kind of lower, because the turret of the two is kind of at the same plateau. So, you know, the weapon damage, the damage that the weapon does specifically goes higher. Now, of course, on the glass end, it's actually inverse. Now, the turret and the drone are actually doing less damage than the capacitor on the build, of course. And yeah, that's kind of important to somewhat know. So especially on this, we kind of can know that the turret and drone will function pretty powerfully, and they are actually, you know, on the same ballpark, in the same ballpark as a high end with kinetic momentum, especially. But what we especially lose is because we have less stats, we can't really go that crit chance, crit damage route, not to a degree that will be impactful, because yeah, I've actually calculated that also with having some more crit chance and crit damage, we don't gain that much because we have only 5 places to put some crit chance and crit damage. All that together kind of means that, yeah, it is kind of on par with that, but then on top of that, what we're giving up basically on the weapon damage end, we're gaining back in healing. And this then becomes that if you're going solo, I would still definitely go the high-end route, especially, for instance, something like this with the glass, where also just the combined of it is much higher. It is basically 10% higher when you can combine them, but just that weapon damage, especially, that you can much more closely direct and make sure that actually lands on the enemy. That is so much higher and makes it much more effective. But in a group setting, of course, the refactor is also healing while it's doing all of this, and that is actually really strong. Let's go look at our red factor next. And this one is mostly because I was kind of curious about how far ahead behind sideways are we to a red F5, for instance, here. And also, what is the burst DPS of this build? Because, yeah, that does hint at how much damage, of course, we can extract from it. Here we're taking a red factor here with capacitor, and also actually with all of these I'm doing capacitor and then Lexington just also as a comparison, as I wanted to know, is the capacitor that much ahead? Is it worthwhile going? Now generally nowadays, with since the most recent changes to the capacitor a while back, generally if you have 2 yellow cores, it's going to be ahead of most options, but there's a big caveat, and that's actually this one, which is that it has DTA, of course, instead of DTH. Now, it really depends on what you set that DTA to DTH number for to, because if we're kind of going all DTH, basically if we set this to 0% DTA, yeah, the Lexington is of course way ahead at that point. If we're putting this at 100% instead, then the capacitor is ahead because, you know, now the DTH isn't applying and now the DTA of the capacitor is. That's kind of the thing with the capacitor, especially in this role, is that you could actually make a case for when you have more enemies that you're fighting with armor than without. And especially here, we're kind of running it on a build that's going to be used in groups. So when solo, for instance, you're doing a control point and the second wave is like a bunch of reds as well, alongside of a few purples and then some elites. In a 4-man group, where this build is much more at home, you could make a case of everything's now elite. Basically, when you're 4-manning a control point, basically, outside of maybe 1 or 2 purples, you'll only see elites. If we put this at 60% DTA, which is what I'm going to be using here, and there's an important caveat to know, we're using 60% as our kind of approximation of what I think in general that we see in DTA, then, yeah, we get these results. And that is that, yeah, the capacitor definitely is a little bit ahead of it because, yeah, we're comparing everything here is comparing to this top slot. Here, everything is comparing again in between, basically. So if we look at, for instance, as well, once we have the memento full on that build, we are actually gaining around 11% there, which is, of course, very important. That does mean that we want to get some kills in. We do actively want to be aggressive with it, get the kills in, and get that memento charged up in a group setting where we are one of the weaker builds. There is definitely something to be said here for that. That is especially a little bit harder. But yeah, we just have to try to sneak in our kills. With the Lexington here, with this 60% as our DTA rate, the capacitor is way ahead. So we definitely, for that build with 2 yellow cores, we want to go with the capacitor there. And there as well, we would gain around like a little bit over 11.5% once the memento is charged up. If we compare that here against the FIs here, so this is a red FI with Coyote and a red FI with BTSU, both from the build collection, then the red FI actually has around the same damage here, especially with the capacitor. And then actually, if it was with the Lexington, it would be around the same as well. Now, of course, the Lexington as well, one of the things that it can have is, for instance, Killer. Now, of course, we're using this in a group. Killer, maybe not the best one to pick here, but Killer is a simple one to kind of integrate here. That's why I've gone with it. If we put 70 into this Killer spot here, we see that it jumps up by quite a bit for it. Even at the 60%, if we're kind of going, especially this FI with Coyote, and that's also the choice that I kind of make there, is I go with a high end, or for instance, actually, I think on the build page currently there's a Bullet King on it, which kind of works for it, but also, yeah, likely next season it'll become a Lexington with Killer on it. Because yeah, if we can get that kill shot in, but even if this was, for instance, measured, this would be likely, you know, halfway in between the two, and this would be still around 5-6% ahead of capacitor with just measured on it. If we take it with the BTSU one, where we have one more yellow core, because we now have basically the yellow core from the BTSU coming in. Although actually no, so this one has one yellow core. This one has just the technician. This one is going to technician plus BTSU. There we see actually that the capacitor, of course, is dropping a little bit lower, and actually the in between the twos is not that big of a difference. It is 8% still, but if we were to go with, for instance, yeah, measured instead of Killer, because yeah, Killer still, yeah. If we actually remove the Killer, for instance, we see the difference there that, yeah, it drops quite a bit below. So if we kind of have it on the same number, or go with measured, for instance, it'll likely be around the same amount for the capacitor versus the Lexington with measured. But especially if we have Killer and get that trigger going, yeah, we can get extracted quite a bit of it. But especially what I wanted to know is, yeah, how much does this build do? And that is in these settings here as well with, if we take this to 20% headshot rate, which is usually the one that I kind of go with, when we take it with a 20%, we're kind of on the 5.9 here. Where, for instance, a striker is still around 11-ish million, an obliterate striker. That is, yeah, basically we're doing half the damage of a striker at that point. Still, we can get some kills in. We are healing our allies with skill damage that is going out. And of course, yeah, we also have that certain drone, and especially with this season's modifier and next season's as well, where it does apply a little bit of skill damage and also weapon damage to us. We can raise this enough that it is usable. It's definitely not a top pick, but it is in that same ballpark, for instance, as a red FI. And we'll start here as well, actually going with this red factor, as we just saw it a second ago, and we saw its stats. As we kind of saw there as well, I'm just laying it out in crit chance, crit damages to kind of hit numbers that we kind of want to go for. Although actually what we have here as well is that I'm actually hitting 56, and here there is going to be a Coyote in my team. I'm gonna grab instead, and that's kind of what I have here always, is just different mementos with different mods in here. So I was actually running it solo earlier just to warm up a little bit with it. But yeah, here, expecting a mid-range Coyote, we're gonna set it up for that range. And most of these builds as well, I'm gonna expect to be kind of in that, in a team with a Coyote with it. For the rest of it, yeah, we're just going to try to play as aggressive, try to charge up the memento. We've come to the summit here, and we'll start getting going. We're likely just to 3 floors here. We've come to the summit specifically so that we have the no regen directive available for us. And we're starting already with some hacked warhands. The no regen, so one of the things is actually that I would have liked to see is for the season that we have, to have no regen. Next season as well, we won't have no regen, it'll still be fragile armor next season. Because with no regen, healers become a lot more potent. Here we have that turret, or the warhounds exploding. I've actually deployed my turret and kind of stood by it. Faraday, of course, from Technician, is helping me there to kind of... It also helped my drone survive. Incidentally, I wasn't actually practicing to hit that. But with no regen, as we kind of see there nowadays as well, you can't just weapon swap to make it go away. That makes healers actually useful. And I feel any season where we have no regen, which again, next season we still won't, but maybe the one after, the potency of things like this, and especially, you know, one that I like as well, the combat medics, goes up by quite a bit. But what we see there as well is already, we've healed up Pomik already back up. And yeah, I've actually taken a few people from stream here with me just to quickly get together. Just to also, yeah, not have to per se deal with random matchmaking, which, of course, yeah, if I want to take my time and, for instance, do an intro at places, it's kind of hard to coordinate that. Here's well, I'm just going to go back to my turret just to, like, not get zapped. My drone survived incidentally. And yeah, what we do want to do is just to have our turret and drone singing as much as possible, as much of the time. That is the core to any turret drone build, but it is actually harder than one might think. A lot of people go with the term of like, it is, you know, a turret drone build is an AFK build. In general, no. If you're playing in, you know, past season 2, all the way back when like capacitor got introduced, or season 3, when capacitor got introduced, when things like InSync got introduced, where combined arms got introduced, all of those things, they make it so that, yeah, if you're playing it passively, you're kind of doing it wrong, because there's so much damage in capacitor, there's so much damage in getting the turret and drone to, for instance, yeah, always kind of actively hit enemies. And we kind of see the healing there, for instance, on those. We have also hard to earn here on, so they don't have med packs. I'm making it extra hard for them. But yeah, we do want to have our turret and drone be targeting stuff. So in general, what I find myself doing on turret drone builds, and that's also kind of the downside of them, because the damage isn't commensurate to the effort needed. I end up actually shooting just as much as I would on a red build, but then also trying to concentrate on my turret and my drone and where they're shooting, and is my drone coming back, because instead of coming all the way back, if I target somebody else, it'll go there right away. So you do want to be aware like that. And actually, the downside is that for that effort, I don't gain more damage. Now, in the past, that used to be a little bit the case, that we would have decent damage versus red builds. If you went with a negotiator turret drone hybrid back in the day, before Striker actually was what it is nowadays, numbers wise, that negotiator turret drone hybrid or high-end turret drone hybrid was actually able to generally compete with a glass red, and especially as well back then an obliterate red and such. Now what we see here is that the healing that I have isn't actually that strong. It is not to the degree of the full refactor, but is enough to kind of keep people topped off, except that I'm having issues, and this is, for instance, some of those issues where the turret and the drone, my turrets got destroyed by the pulse, or my drone got destroyed by the pulse. My turret isn't, like, just didn't want to target anything. It was on break. It was on lunch break. So it became a moment there. And those moments are frustrating. And that's also the reason why overall I do still have combat medics, and I still will run combat medics. Because situationally, those are less frustrating in kind of those moments. Those moments where I want to heal my allies, but my turret just doesn't want to do it. That doesn't happen when I have a chem. available to me. And that's kind of the deal here. And that does kind of, it doesn't break Refactor for me, but it definitely doesn't make it a replacement for Combat Medic, as I was kind of fearing it would be. Now we'll see with the turret drone one, it is actually, or well, the full turret drone one, the yellow cord one, that it can perform a little bit better than this, just because it just needs a few shots on the enemy, and it'll do here. But here I'm doing still okay-ish damage. We won't see an end of mission result here or something that we can kind of compare in between, but yeah. Here as well, so we do have jammers. So one of the things with jammers is, of course, normally you would say like this completely disables, but no, we can actually deploy my turret. My turret has Faraday now, and I of course am Faraday. And from that point on, I'll trust you know, that me and my team will get the thing going pretty quickly. I was just shooting that thing while it was still immune. But this thing, I feel, this red one, for like 4-man here, or for instance doing it in the open world, kind of can do that role of a combat medic and kind of, yeah, run with the team, make sure that no regen basically takes the sting off of it. And of course, as we saw on the numbers end of it, even when I'm fully charged up on the momentum, and here especially, we're just doing like 3 floors here and we're not going that in-depth with it or long with it. That's also the thing you would want with this. You would want this, you would want to run this for, you know, with a team where you're running it for, you know, several things in a row. So doing just a few floors here is kind of doing it a disservice, but I feel this was the best place to kind of showcase it. Because if we were going for a longer time, eventually I'll fill up the momentum, of course, and then we're, you know, gaining those amounts as well. And yeah, especially things like heavies and warhands, for especially the turret and the drone, can make, you know, good targets. We can just hit them a lot. Here as well, my turret is gonna, and yeah, my drone as well. both have given hope. There it is. Drone finally realized it isn't stationary like the turret. It was just there, hanging out with the turret in solidarity. But yeah. That is kind of the downside of it. It isn't as controlled as you would want it to be. And that kind of does hurt it a little bit. Yeah, let's go take our bucks at the end here. And then we'll round out this segment. We'll go through the builds kind of quickly because, yeah, there's plenty of them. And I want to keep this below... I want to keep it below the length of a full-on masterclass instead of the build of a build showcase. But yeah, let's go on and look actually at the turret drone version. And next up, we'll take indeed the turret drone one, the full skill build one, basically the turret drone setup. Here as well, one thing that I definitely would consider, we're going to take this into Roosevelt and Legendary actually. And just do the starting few rooms. We're not going to do the entirety of it, just to kind of showcase a little bit what this can do. I am not taking the chest here though, although the chest would definitely be a consideration that you could take, especially if the team is a little bit weaker, because you can give up a little bit of your damage as well. Again, also then kind of weakening the build or the team a little bit, but then the healing becomes much more potent, and because of that, it will actually add to it. So generally what you can kind of see it as is that because we're doing more damage because of kinetic momentum, this is around like 26, 27% of the 35% that the chest would give. So it's also not basically a 20% versus a 35% because the chest talent, of course, increases our damage. Yeah, let's jump over there and get started. And yeah, we've come here to Roosevelt. Same team as actually a moment before. We're just taking it in this way. Here we have with red builds and then me kind of as the support. So we're not going in with with what we would normally have, which is an Eclipse. So generally we run most of these runs with 1 foam and then 3 3 damage dealer, so generally striker. But we have done so, of course, in the past, sometimes here and there with the form of a Umbra or such. And yeah, here damage-wise, so even without the chest, you can see basically people are getting hit and then they're kind of popping back to full. The downside of it is, as we see there, is if you haven't seen the the only tips on it, is the health gate, and that's kind of why generally, yeah, our go-to will not change to be a refactor, especially in like random teams. I could see this working a little bit more, but especially in coordinated teams, the effects that foam eclipse can have and can make it so much more faster, basically. Preventing the damage is just going to be better than healing the damage. If the damage doesn't happen in the first place, we've solved the whole issue, and there is nothing. There's no issues, basically, and that's kind of the thing. And here as well, as I kind of started that sentence, the health gate. The health gate, if you're not familiar with it, is a gate at the end of the health. It is there. You can go watch the only tips. I might even link that down below in the description. I explained it in there, but every time that someone reaches the end of their health, they have a 30-second timer that if they reach the end of their health again, they will get downed. But the first time, you basically have a protection there. That's also what usually gets called the one-shot protection. That effect is, means that even if I heal somebody back to full, if they get hit hard enough, that doesn't matter. Because if they're getting hit by a sniper, and I heal them back to full, and they stand back up and get hit by a sniper again, they're getting downed. There's nothing I can do to prevent that. That also means that any build, like this, or like FI, or like any healer, is very dependent as well on your teammates. So here, for instance, I'm very confident that, for instance, my teammates are at least a little bit aware of it, especially, for instance, Pomic and Tennyson will know that system well. Lade will be learning it, likely, in here. What we do want to do is be aggressive and move up with our teammates as well here. We'll likely go all the way up to basically through this next room as well. And what we do see is every time my allies do get hit, they pop back up quite quickly on health. I'm going to send my turret or my drone generally as a harassing tool. It'll go after what is perceived to be the biggest issue. So for instance here, the 2 snipers. This is, for instance, keeping those 2 snipers perfectly busy with just 1 drone. And then my turret is generally going into a high area. This is what I would in general do with drone builds in general, is just try to get the turret up on high where it can shoot everybody, where it can be effective in that way. And one thing that turret and drone generally do anyway is draw a lot of, for instance there, the drones of that drone operator did go up, but they went after my drone because it was the easiest, nearest target, and my drone just took it. Yeah, we're going to push through, and for instance, in this part, it's kind of important that we stick together, and then in the end part of this, there is basically a wave in the back. So we're going to go through, kill the waves across, and then come back. The thing with Legendary is it is very consistent. Once you know the spawns, they're that every single time. Now, I'm going to go and get set up here. I'm going to put my turret down. That engagement actually with for instance, that's an important one to know, that when we're shooting a Warhound, for instance, with an EMP sticky, as long as we don't detonate the EMP sticky, I won't get from Comic there, it doesn't actually aggro yet. And yeah, we see that while the healing of this isn't as good as with the chest, because the healing is definitely better with that. And here, for instance, that would definitely just work out because my team is strong enough. So I could give up a little bit of my damage. And here we want to kill these 2 waves, and then we're going to fall back real quick. We do especially want to kill that heavy on the side, but as well, my drone as well, acting as kind of a skirmisher against that heavy. I'm going to recycle my drone here, but yeah, we're going to fall back and try to catch this wave as it lands. And if we can do that, that will be in our favor. of course here as well, I have the teammates to kind of do this with, but in a slower team, doing it slower, you could definitely get by running Refactor. Refactor, especially for Legendary, I feel definitely has a place. You're doing damage and you're healing. We're gonna go grab the boxes here. Of course, the box is also scaling to Legendary. I do also want to show this way of getting up, as a lot of people don't know about that one and just go around. Also, I'll grab that just to share for its stat later on, maybe. We don't want to forget any of our skills and such, of course. Let's do one more room. Let's do the burn pits as well. Just to have shown that. And then maybe as well, we might actually show we might cut there and go to the boss room and maybe show that as well, actually, because that would be a good fight to kind of show the opportunities that we have here. And here we're going to bunch up and go in all together. Because we have the waves here. One thing to remember is, yeah, you're a technician. So, for instance, we are going to try to grenade and such. We can do that for the warhounds and such, for instance, but here just as this tool. Anyway, my teammates are pretty effective and familiar with this mission as well. One of the things with legendaries is that if every person kind of knows what they're doing, it goes pretty consistently quick. Yeah, let's get the key chest as well, just to have that. Of course, we do want. Got a loot. We did the shoot, we got the loot. I'm gonna actually recycle my drone there. Wait for everybody to be here. And yeah, let's go do this room. And positioning, of course, for third drone. This is a third drone build at heart. So yeah, positioning matters. I'm gonna put it forward and kind of covering as much area as it can. I want it to be able to shoot. I want to give it the best chances to do the most that it can. Also, by being in front of us, it will actually draw some of the aggro. You will see a bunch of the things like drones and such. They will go for them. And yeah, as any person gets hit, they'll get popped up to full health pretty quickly. But yeah, it's kind of dependent on them as well to know the health gate mechanics. Once they basically get health gated, once you reach that end of the health, they need to watch out that, you know, the next one is going to take them down, even if I've healed them back up. It's especially stuff like chip damage, that for instance there, Tony-san got hit a few times, but it didn't go all the way to the end of his health. That gets prevented here, and Legendary is a lot of chip damage. So yeah, actually, let's just for brevity's sake, we'll cut it up here, and we'll come back at the boss room and actually kind of show that area. And yeah, we've come to the boss fight here. We're gonna do it with this and then the red builds, and yeah, we're gonna go over, and of course we'll have to deal with the marauders and these waves. We're gonna kind of hold this area at the start here. I'm gonna put my turret pretty far forward, or a decently bit forward. Taking too much time to set it up there. And the healing to myself is actually pretty, you know, it's basically half of what goes out to my allies. I'm gonna especially put my turret in a second to go after the destroyer here, of course, destroyer of worlds. I'm gonna put my drone on some other things. Now, of course, here the turret is kind of at full strength, kind of always healing at full strength, effectively. That does mean that, yeah, the healing is pretty good against the bosses, and that's good against the minigun of the bosses, but if they get hit, if anybody here gets hit by the rockets, including me, well, basically, that first one is going to take us to health gate, the second one is going to take us down. I'm going to actually MP grenade over there. We've killed the marauders pretty quickly. I believe I was hearing Ravenous going off there as well, which is, of course, a really good tool here. And honestly, I was just going to do the first few rooms. Also, I see an exotic there. And it being from a specific source, we likely have the biggest of the horns. We do want to keep our turret and drone singing. And then here especially, it's one of those things where, yeah, it is at longer distances. So it becomes kind of, we have to make choices. Like, how do I get up here and get my turret? I want to, of course, pick it back up. My drone is off cooldown. I'm gonna, yeah, we need some healing quickly. Let's see if I can get that done. One of the things always with healers is if you can keep the healing not, you know, whenever you're spending 2 seconds to met back, that's 2 seconds where you're not DPSing, of course. Yeah, we have the wave in the back. We have enough damage here to kind of deal with them quickly. If you can have a healer, they can kind of, you know, mitigate that. But that comes, of course, at its own cost. That healer is not doing as much damage. But here, I'm doing much more damage than, let's say, a full FI could. Of course, the full FI would also be applying a buff to all the allies here. I'm not doing that, but I'm doing about the same in healing, and then I'm doing a little bit more damage. Now, it would be interesting to kind of try to talk about how much damage would that add to teammates, and then how much healing and such. But also, for instance, here, I don't have to focus on my allies at all when I'm healing, which is also a really important tool. I don't have to know where my allies are. I just do my damage with my turret and drone, and we get the results that way. And yeah, it's actually not from specific source. It is from targeted source, and it's just the Elmo. But we'll maybe make that find a good home with one of our teammates. I am actually curious on how we did damage-wise here. And while I am not, you know, in the same league as, for instance, full strikers on these two, and Lade was especially as well, is a newer player, and yeah, they're not actually even that geared up, but they were more than willing to join us in this fight, so good on them. I am doing, you know, we're doing half on kills, 2/3 on damage, and that is the deal with this. It is doing damage on its own. Now, of course, in the FI sense, if I was buffing like my teammates for around 25%, if they were running chest striker, which I don't think they are actually, but if it's even like 20%-ish helping, you know, or if we average that to 15%, they would be doing 15% more, and then the healing might be more consistent. But this is definitely a good way to deal with legendaries. And I found, and many with me found that, yeah, it is definitely a worthwhile tool, especially, for instance, for matchmaking, because as well here, we don't need coordination. I don't need to know where my teammates are. They're getting healed if they want to or not. I don't need to we don't need to huddle up on a hive. One thing, though, is that, for instance, the chest definitely is a worthwhile option to consider here. That's also why I brought it with me, just in case if we needed it. I could have swapped to this, and I have a swap in Honey piece, I believe a glove, or no, actually it's a knee pad, just so also the core doesn't change. But for legendaries, this is more than good enough, and that's also been the thing. Some people have been poo-pooing it as, you know, maybe not needed, but it doesn't need to be needed if it's just useful by itself. Let's go actually look at an explosive version of this for just a little bit before we take it to that status effect one. And here we come to an explosive version of the same build that we had a second ago. As we saw in the build picture, we can kind of reconfigure this and kind of rejig this to become an explosive setup. So what has happened is we've gone to demo. Because of that, we've flipped the skill tier here. So we've gone from that red core that we had here when we had technician to this yellow core. And then as well, as a setup for it, because especially explosive damage helps quite a bit for our mortar here. We're going that route. And then as well, if we're just going one piece, we might as well go the sacrifice. So that is the kind of the setup for it. Here, we're going to go and assault this control point. We're going to do so in a somewhat more aggressive and hectic way. And that's also why I've picked the hive and the mortar. So there's a gap here as we're coming up to the sinkhole, and they have a back hole on the sinkhole. And from there, we can just come back here. I'm going to put my hive here, covering basically 3 spawn points, and that will instantly engage us here. And as we see here, whenever my skills are hitting, especially, for instance, that hive there, which will continuously have some enemies to hit, we're just filling back up to full. Now, the downside of this is, of course, it's very much, it isn't every, with the turrets, it's constantly continuously damaging enemies, making for a very consistent stream of healing. Here, of course, every time a mortar hits, we're getting one big chunk of healing. Everybody's popping back to full. Whenever my hive kind of is hitting people, it's bumping people back to full. I'm already as well going to call it in. So now normally we would not do this. We would split it into 2 fights. Just here to add to the hecticness. We're going to already call them in and make it one big fight. Because yeah, if you don't call them in right away, one of the things that happens is that these guys are just trying to get out of dodge. Trying to get out the way we came in, actually. That's also the area that it is in the upper northwest corner there. If you missed exactly where we came on over. Now the thing is though that we don't have that much skill haste, so not even as much skill haste as a normal mortar build. That makes it so that the hive isn't that quick to regen, because here as well we're not using a BDSU that would normally make for a very quick regen of the hive. And yeah, now we're gonna have the defense. They will spawn pretty much from over there. And that means that I'm just gonna kind of set up here in the middle, at least with my mortar, and just try to hit enemies as often as I can. Of course, this does hit hard. I'm also kind of feeling the thing that I oftentimes feel when I'm running the full mortar build, which is that it's actually kind of hard to get the capacitor up and also do the mortar thing. And that's why I like in sync very much, much more so for this. And actually, we have in sync on here the harmony. But a shotgun would be better. A shotgun with 12 DTOC or 12 DTA as its stat, because the DTA does apply to the explosives. Now, there, somebody was damaged a little, but yeah, when that mortar lands, it will instantly heal everybody back up to full, including me. Although, yeah, I sillily tried to push up there. But also that's kind of the thing. Sometimes you do get hurt. And as well, we've gone from kinetic to glass. Glass, of course, yeah, hurts quite a bit more than kinetic did. We're taking 60% here with perfect. More incoming damage in effect. And yeah, I'm just going to try to get my hive into a position where it can maybe get a hit in. It didn't really. But we'll just quick fire. There's actually a door there, even though the game isn't as you kind of see there. It's bouncing off an invisible door. We'll just move our hive over. And while this may be not per se the best kind of place to kind of showcase it, it still does help heal people back up a little bit, and yeah, we're still having an effect. If nothing else, we're giving a lot of screen shake to our allies. But yeah, just to have shown this, and as well to put it into people's minds, because this definitely is also a good way to set this. And yeah, lastly, but definitely not leastly, we'll go to that status effect one. And I quite enjoy this one as well, especially, you know, as some that do know me, you'll know that I definitely enjoy Eclipsing. On this character, actually, this has replaced their Eclipse, so this would normally be their Eclipse slot. They have an foam Eclipse, an hazard protected foam Eclipse for countdown, but yeah, this has basically replaced their Fire Eclipse for me. It isn't for per se as potent as a Fire Eclipse, but it's good enough, and I can get by with it. Also, I wanted to make sure that you know that on the build picture, of course, we have it with the backpack basically being high-end and then the BTSU. Actually, the way that the build is saved is here with these 5 pieces. And that is if I want to play around with it, because situationally, I might want to go with a Val instead. Although I've ended up basically taking it always with the BTSU and a Hive. And that's kind of my preferred way, but I still saved it in this way. I do this quite often with builds, and this allows me to have some options. Same as well, we could swap out the chest, but I found actually that the chest here were, especially because some of the spread damage, as we were discussing when we're going over the build layout, if it's damage that is coming from, in this case, Creeping Death, that doesn't count for the healing, but that's basically not getting counted for this. It is only anything I directly set, you know, with the explosion of the fire or the Stinger Hive hitting them. But if it's fire spreading through Creeping Death, that actually doesn't heal anyone. Still does its damage, of course, and that's why we're taking it. It's for the CC part, not for the healing part. But yeah, that does mean that we're kind of running it like this. I have a Fire Cam as well, and a Stinger Hive, as we saw there. As well, here I'm taking a Survivalist. Here, I feel this works out pretty well for this because we can have that 10% for our allies, and that adds up. This in potency is definitely not as strong as Eclipse in general, but it's good enough. And we're going to go take it to a Lincoln run here with the same team we've seen so far. And yeah, let's see how we do. And yeah, let's go do indeed a Lincoln with this, with the same team. We're going to just take Fog of War and Fragile Armor. Nothing to deal with our skills and stuff, even though, yeah, here in the open world we do have them. So that's where we see the drops here. Here, I'm going to just play this kind of like an Eclipse. I'm going to actually send one off the wall there. And creeping didn't carry it over, and of course it's not going to spread afterwards. Like that's the thing that you kind of have to learn if you're coming from the Eclipse end. And I messed up that quite a bit. But yeah, here we're still doing kind of Eclipse things, and especially, of course, with a mission like this that I'm pretty familiar with. And the same goes for kind of all of us. Oh, well, in general. Although I wouldn't per se prefer this over an Eclipse in general, or something like this. But I found it actually, for instance, with Bounty Season to be a really good addition to it. Because it gives a little bit of healing at that start part where sometimes it can get hectic. But here with a very, you know, we know exactly where it's very predictable content, where we know kind of there's going to be a wave there, another wave is going to spawn there. I need to, yeah, I don't have the Eclipse, so I kind of need to set every wave on fire. And of course as well, here, this being a gear set too, it doesn't actually have that much haste. That's one of the bigger downsides. And what I quite often find myself doing here and there is, if I run out of fire chems, what I'll do is just lob a few grenades. That's also why I like running Survivalist with it. In a little bit, we'll likely see me lob a grenade or two. And yeah, if somebody else can open it, I'll take the high ground here. And especially, I want to kind of set up to get that one elite wave that spawns in a little bit. But here, for instance, on just a wave like that, when I set them on fire, I'm basically doing the same as an Eclipse. I'm going to put my Stinger Hive there. There's one later on, a very dangerous wave there. I'm going to kind of get those guys. I'm actually going to add a sledge to this. But keep in mind that, yeah, the fire from a grenade or such isn't doing any healing, of course. It is just fire. But they're just, yeah, for its sledge. I'm going to also send the second one that will actually from the top. It will, when that wave spawns, it will actually, while I'm holding the lefty, and that's also why I have a lefty equipped, of course, it will actually go through the ceiling and kind of deal with enemies downstairs. Yeah, I could try to maybe set somebody on fire here to heal. I repeat, the compound is all clear. My teammates will be fine. They have Fragile on. And that's also one of the things. In a season like this, where in the open world and in missions, we do have Fragile. And Fragile, I can't, of course, do anything about it. One thing I would love for them to do is if you get healed for, let's say, maybe 1 million or 2, let's say 2 million, from a source, and that way as well. You can't really do it with just a 0-tier drone on yourself, or it takes forever. But that would incentivize to run healers more, because if they can heal away the fragile armor, now they kind of become a favorite. Because as well, in this case, we won't go that long that my teammates will gather up way too many fragiles. But over time, of course, yeah, if my teammates kind of had like 4 fragile armors on them, they don't have that much health for me or armor for me to heal. Here as well, I know kind of what the spawns are. That is important for this, if we're running it in this setup. Now with the third drone one, that's less so. That one you can definitely play reactively. So whenever you see something happen, you just, you know, start pointing your gun and your turrets that way and you deal with it. This one needs to be played proactively. So you want to play it in a way where you know where the spawns and such are going to be. And of course, that's not per se new player friendly. That does take some time. It isn't hard to do if you do a mission once or twice, and especially if you're running it, for instance, run it with a pulse and pulse quite often, which with this season, of course, with microwave coils is already a really smart thing to do. And, you know, but then as well, whenever the wave spawns, you can kind of see, okay, this wave spawns there. And while it isn't always, you know, this wave spawns here, over time you will notice that, okay, some waves are very fixed, some waves are very much dependent on kind of where the facing is. And yeah, that is just a thing. I mean, that's just game knowledge. You have to build that up over time. You can use, there are people that, for instance, have speedrun guides for instance, some of the legendaries and such that can make it much more knowable what you need to do. But for instance, here, I know in the next room, there's going to be a standing wave at the start. When we kill that standing wave, they're always going to spawn from the door on the left of that. After that, it is facing dependent. And that's also one of those things. Facing dependence is just wherever most of the team is facing, that's where they're actually going to spawn. And here, I'm going to zoom through. I'm going to wait for this Banshee to land, actually, and add that to the mix. And I do want to catch as many enemies with my original fire cam. While that creeping death will spread it to the nearby enemies, it won't heal my allies, of course. Here as well, we aren't per se like coordinating right now, of course. While my allies are actually on comms with me, I'm gonna, just, they're muted, basically. Normally we would have callouts here where stuff is happening, but we've run this mission and we've run together enough that we know how to kind of trust each other. We know that, you know, likely this person is gonna go for those waves. That like there is some coordination just happening by familiarity, and that is of course a thing that it might even be seen as maybe cherry picking. But that is actually also what refactor builds kind of need. You need to know your teammates. Your teammates need to know kind of you. Everybody needs to know what the health gate is. It is kind of conditional to those, and the results will be conditional to those as well. So I didn't need ammo there, actually. Also as well, actually, I want to point at, I'm not actually now running, I forgot to grab it, the grade 25 capacitor. I could definitely use that. With the red factor as well, we weren't running that. We were only running the grade 25 actually with the Turk drone version that we had a second ago. Here as well, there's a first standing wave, then a wave spawns from that door, then it's facing dependent. So if, for instance, actually here, if we were like fully coordinating and everybody was facing that they could just see this door, they would guarantee spawn from there. And actually there, even without the guarantee per se, but everybody was definitely facing that way. They could have likely as well spawned from that door, but, you know, 50-50s, RNG'd. And while, for instance, in a place like this, I feel pretty confident that I'm going to catch everybody with an Eclipse anyway, and that way
that should keep them from getting more of those mortars.
You know, CC just as much. Because here as well, I'm CCing, and I'm actually preventing damage from getting to happen. That's the point of crowd control CC in general anyway. So because I'm CCing, already not that much damage happens. But of course, the thing is, it isn't that no damage happens at all. There's been plenty of points here where, somebody was going to get hit, and we prevented that. And here as well, I'm going to kind of go to the side and send this cam. Catch as many people. I'm gonna leave my hive kind of here-ish. And this is very much, I know these things as I do them as an Eclipse. And I'm kind of playing this as an Eclipse, but yeah, doing kind of different things. We, you know, we don't have the spread. We don't have the damage of Eclipse neither, because an Eclipse would do more damage. But for instance, here as well, in a second, I do have an supercharge. I'm supercharging here. And for instance, my chem is now much larger. Any skills used by my allies is much more effective. That Banshee, for instance, was a 6 tier instead of a 0 tier. And also that would put a damage. We don't need it there per se, but you know, we're just cleaning up. But that did put the pulse effect and overcharged pulse effect on that boss as well, gaining the damage that you do from an overcharge pulse. So yeah, we'll grab our loot, we'll go to the elevator and take our way upstairs. Just want to see the end of mission results. Here with an Eclipse, I can definitely hang with with strikers and such. And we should have actually used our supercharge here and there more because, yeah, we basically have a few places to do it. But of course, with talking, we weren't paying attention. Yeah, let's wait for the mission completions there. But there we saw kind of what this can do. And I definitely like this setup. One thing we could have gone with as well is different backpacks. And actually for here would have worked out perfectly fine. The creeping that did grab a few enemies here and there, definitely. But it wasn't going to grab... it wasn't per se needed. And I could have gone with something else. And yeah, while I'm not, you know, in the same leagues or anything, with the healing, with the CC, I did enough, right? And yeah, we could always trade this out for instance, going either running that lefty together with a setup backpack or going with this overclock, which actually, yeah, for bounty cheesing and such, because we didn't need it per se there, I would run this Hermano for that perfect overclock, gaining these reload speeds and such. Yeah, let's take this to a conclusion and round this all out. And yeah, we come to the conclusion of this somewhat long, but actually not as long as I feared it was going to be, build showcase. As in the end, this kind of turned almost into a masterclass, but I hope the gameplay sections being a little bit shorter doesn't offend anyone, although, well, or just feel, you know, less worth your money, but also, yeah, money back guarantee if you need it. And yeah, what we saw here is Refactor actually in different forms, and actually in 3 very different forms, performs pretty well. The Refactor, as we kind of saw it, the drone version, which is kind of the general meta for the gear set. And then even here with this status effect version that works pretty well and can do part of Eclipse, but not to the same degree, but then does healing on top of it, of course. All of those are actually very worthwhile builds, even the explosions version, the explosive version that we saw as well. And I quite enjoy running Refactor as it has come in, and it's been actually a while since a gear set has come in and actually has been added to the build collection in more than one way. Honestly, the last time that has happened is likely more like towards when Hotshot or Umbra and especially Heartbreaker definitely came in with multiple versions, especially early on when it was broken. It's been 4 seasons after Hotshot where we've had somewhat more mediocre stuff like Aegis and Virtuoso and Breaking Point and Cavalier. We definitely have a standout gear set here. It isn't the best, it isn't the strongest. In that legendary, if we were with a Foam Eclipse and 3 strikers, we would have likely done it faster. In the with the red version, going through Summit with a combat medic and going through it, I would have actually felt a little bit more comfortable. And here as well, on that Lincoln mission, I could have likely done it better with an Eclipse. But this definitely is a different playstyle, and that is sometimes all I need. I want kind of the things we were always doing, but in a little bit different way. Here as well, definitely as a supporty version, I quite enjoy it. And that's a playstyle, if you do enjoy that, this is kind of the de facto gear set for that. So yeah, we come to the end of this silliness and this very long build showcase here. And yeah, I want to take the time here as well to thank Pamik and thank Donison and thank Latte Cookie for helping out here. As yeah, they definitely made it a lot easier than just random matchmaking. And for this as well, it is definitely a group build. You want to have a little bit of that coordination going, and yeah, if you are gelling well with your teammates, that helps quite a bit. So yeah, if you did find this video enjoyable, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help out, so I'll do that little bit of shilling here. And for future videos, we're going to go, of course, into a new season with, of course, new season things to discuss there. But before we reach that point, I am going to actually do that thing I've been talking about for quite a while, and that is a call for backup. And yeah, you guys will see, and you will see what that means in 4 days after this video. So yeah, I hope you join me for those. And as always, have a good night.